And the first chapter includes David is very old, and he's having problems staying warm, so they get someone outside the family, outside the concubines, to kind of keep him warm and watch over him. But he's also not really being part of his like ruling and reigning the kingdom. And his son Abijah or something like that, and that's, I'm pronouncing that wrong, but has really like kind of taken over, tried to take over the throne. And Bathsheba and Nathan, Bathsheba and Nathan basically go to him and say, "You're taking it over." Yeah.
Justify concubines.
How do they justify concubines? I think it's part of. I think it's a cultural thing. I mean, it's not our culture at all, and so that's kind of the king, and especially wives, and we're going to see this in Solomon. And I think it's one of the interesting things about Solomon is that wives are oftentimes, and as we were reading 1st and 2nd Samuel, they're oftentimes signifiers of treaties. So it's like, I'll give you politics. Yeah, it's all politics. And so they get all these wives because kings just have tons of wives.
Right.
And so
concubines are by choice.
Yeah, well, I don't think they're so much by choice. I think they're kind of, they operate in that kind of similar thing, though. It's kind of a signifier of power and wealth and all of that. And so that's by David not having, I did more study on it. I didn't do any study last week or 2 weeks ago, but by David not having a concubine or a wife take care of him, it was guaranteed that there was no intercourse, because intercourse may weaken him. Was kind of what I was reading about. Yeah.
Question.
Here we go. Always been taught one man, one woman.
Yeah.
We're talking about in the context of David's life.
So one man, one woman is actually pretty new, and so especially amongst the powerful, and so there's always these things that are moving around, and all that, and so it's a signifier for power, and so like that's and I think that's what we see, and we see that ascent of power is what ends up taking down Solomon. So David kind of rises up with Bathsheba and Nathan, and basically say, nope, it's actually going to be Solomon that's going to be king, and Solomon kind of rises up as he's going through here. And the one thing I want to point out again is that it keeps talking about Solomon riding David's mule. That's I think that's a signifier for what's coming later, because we start seeing that Solomon goes after horses later, and horses, especially in the Deuteronomic law, is kind of a signature of wealth and Egyptian power. And so kind of when he starts going towards that, we start kind of seeing going there. So I think talking about the king's mule is all these interesting things. And I think last time we got together, we connected the mule to like Jesus riding in on Palm Sunday, even though the Bible never mentions that Mary rode a donkey in the Bible. Like that.
Are we back there?
Yeah. Even though that's never mentioned, I think that tradition of the church that she rode in our donkey is connected to that same sense. And so, yeah.
Well, I think that's common because, accepted because of the fact that we all appreciate, at least those of us who are men, what a woman goes through, and wouldn't want her to walk all the way.
Miles.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like I think that's some of it there. So that's kind of where we are. We're going to start off with chapter 2, and we will read all of chapter 2. So it's another long chapter. The First and Kings starts off with all these long chapters. So, all right. So let's share the screen, optimize for video, And again, everyone online, let me know if the echo does not go away after a couple seconds. All right, here we go.
Now the days of David drew near that he should die. And he charged Solomon his son,
I go the way of all the earth. Be strong, therefore, and prove yourself a man. And keep the charge of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, his commandments, his judgments, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you turn, that the Lord may fulfill his word, which he spoke concerning me, saying, If your sons take heed to their way, to walk before me in truth, with all their heart and with all their soul, he said, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel. Moreover, you know also what Joab, the son of Zeruiah, did to me, and what he did to the two commanders of the armies of Israel, to Abner, the son of Ner, and Amasa, the son of Jether, whom he killed. And he shed the blood of war in peacetime, and put the blood of war on his belt that was around his waist, and on his sandals that were on his feet. Therefore, do according to your wisdom, and do not let his gray hair go down to the grave in peace, but show kindness to the sons of Barzillai, the Gileadite, and let them be among those who eat at your table. For so they came to me when I fled from Absalom your brother. And see, you have with you Shimei, the son of Gera, a Benjamite from Meshulam, who cursed me with a malicious curse in the day when I went to Mahanaim. But he came down to meet me at the Jordan, and I swore to him by the Lord, saying, I will not put you to death with the sword. Now, therefore, do not hold him guiltless, for you are a wise man, and know what you ought to do to him, but bring his gray hair down to the grave with blood.
So David rested with his fathers, and was buried in the city of David. The period that David reigned over Israel was 40 years. 7 years he reigned in Hebron, and in Jerusalem he reigned 33 years. Then Solomon sat on the throne of his father David, and his kingdom was firmly established. Now Adonijah, the son of Haggith, came to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon.
Do you come peaceably?
Peaceably. I have something to say to you.
Say it.
You know that the kingdom was mine, and all Israel had set their expectations on me, that I should reign. However, the kingdom has been turned over, and has become my brother's, for it was his from the Lord. Now I ask one petition of you. Do not deny me.
Say it.
Please speak to King Solomon, for he will not refuse you, that he may give me Abishag the Shunammite as wife.
Very well. I will speak for you to the king.
Bathsheba therefore went to King Solomon to speak to him for Adonijah. And the king rose up to meet her, and bowed down to her, and sat down on his throne, and had a throne set for the king's mother. So she sat at his right hand. Then she said,
I desire one small petition of you. Do not refuse me.
Ask it, my mother, for I will not refuse you.
Let Abishag the Shunammite be given to Adonijah your brother as wife.
Now, why do you ask Abishag, the Shunammite? for Adonijah. Ask for him the kingdom also, for he is my older brother. For him, and for Abiathar the priest, and for Joab, the son of Zeruiah.
Then King Solomon swore by the Lord,
May God do so to me, and more also, if Adonijah has not spoken this word against his own life. Now, therefore, as the Lord lives, who has confirmed me and set me on the throne of David my father, and who has established a house for me, as he promised, Adonijah shall be put to death today.
So King Solomon sent by the hand of Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, and he struck him down, and he died. And to Abiathar the priest, the king said,
Go to Anathoth, to your own fields, for you are deserving of death. But I will not put you to death at this time, because you carried the ark of the Lord God before my father David, and because you were afflicted every time my father was afflicted.
So Solomon removed Abiathar from being priest to the Lord, that he might fulfill the word of the Lord which he spoke concerning the house of Eli at Shiloh. Then news came to Joab, for Joab had defected to Adonijah, though he had not defected to Absalom. And so Joab fled to the tabernacle of the Lord, and took hold of the horns of the altar. And King Solomon was told,
Joab has fled to the tabernacle of the Lord. There he is, by the altar.
Then Solomon sent Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada.
Go, strike him down.
So Benaiah went to the tabernacle of the Lord, and said to him,
Thus says the king, Come out.
No, but I will die here.
And Benaiah brought back word to the king.
Thus said Joab, and thus he answered me.
Do as he has said, and strike him down and bury him, that you may take away from me and from the house of my father the innocent blood which Joab shed. So the Lord will return his blood on his head, because he struck down 2 men more righteous and better than he, and killed them with the sword. Abner, the son of Ner, the commander of the army of Israel, and Amasa, the son of Jether, the commander of the army of Judah, though my father David did not know it. Their blood shall therefore return upon the head of Joab, and upon the head of his descendants forever. But upon David and his descendants, upon his house and his throne, there shall be peace forever from the Lord.
So Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, went up and struck and killed him, and he was buried in his own house in the wilderness. The king put Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, in his place over the army, and the king put Zadok the priest in the place of Abiathar. Then the king sent and called for Shimei, and said to him,
Build yourself a house in Jerusalem and dwell there, and do not go out from there anywhere. For it shall be, on the day you go out and cross the brook Kidron, know for certain you shall surely die. Your blood shall be on your own head.
And Shimei said to the king,
The saying is good. As my lord the king has said, so your servant will do.
So Shimei dwelt in Jerusalem many days. Now it happened at the end of 3 years that 2 slaves of Shimei ran away to Achish, the son of Maacah, king of Gath. And they told Shimei,
Look, your slaves are in Gath.
So Shimei arose, saddled his donkey, and went to Achish at Gath to seek his slaves. And Shimei went and brought his slaves from Gath. And Solomon was told that Shimei had gone from Jerusalem to Gath, and had come back. Then the king sent and called for Shimei, and said to him,
Did I not make you swear by the Lord, and warn you, saying, Know for certain that on the day you go out and travel anywhere, you shall surely die? And you said to me, The word I have heard is good. Why then have you not kept the oath of the Lord and the commandment that I gave you? You know, as your heart acknowledges, all the wickedness that you did to my father David. Therefore, the Lord will return your wickedness on your own head. But King Solomon shall be blessed, and the throne of David shall be established before the Lord forever.
So the king commanded Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and he went out and struck him down, and he died. Thus the kingdom was established in the hand of Solomon.
Okay, that's cheerful.
I have a question.
Please.
Was the answer
1 second.
his request to have the woman become his wife, yes or no?
Where are you talking about?
In the beginning,
Yeah.
the mother.
Oh no, I think that was a no because she killed him. Yeah, like that one. Yeah. It's pretty definitive. Yeah, like that's a big no there. That's a big no. So, Fred, what were you asking?
They make such a big deal over a couple of slaves that ran away to somebody else.
They're at the end of Gath.
Yeah. The slave that was not listening to what he was told.
After them leaving, doing what Solomon told him not to do.
And I think it also has to go back to, like, I like how the
with the sheet.
Yeah. Well, I like how this puts it with David's last dying wish to Solomon there at the beginning of our reading. He's like, the way it does it on the sheet here is like, stay faithful to God. Oh, and by the way, murder all my enemies. That's what David says on his dying bed to Solomon.
Right. It's interesting that he found it illegal.
Yeah. Well, like kill and murder are kind of the same thing. Yeah. Like that's, yeah, Mick.
It's interesting that he valued his state servants above his own life.
Yeah.
Saying the fact he's under death.
Maybe
still feels compelling.
Maybe adults.
Well,
yeah. All right. So you're talking about what David requested there?
No, Shimei's cleaning after him.
Oh yeah,
a lot of people get specific directions and do the opposite.
Yeah.
And he's been told you go outside, you're gonna lose your life, and he goes outside.
Sorry. Yeah. So it's let's back up. It's back up for kind of towards the beginning. Because there's a lot, and yet it's all kind of the same in this chapter. It's like there's like 3 things that happen, and it's all kind of the same story. But what kind of stood out to you? We've already kind of started talking about what stood out to us, but what stood out to you in chapter 2?
Solomon was consolidating his power.
So Solomon's consolidating his power.
Yeah, he put in a new priest. He put in a new commander of his army.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting that when Bathsheba came and talked to David in chapter 1, that she's like, he hasn't brought this guy and he hasn't brought this guy, and all of that, and like some of those allegiances aren't there now with Solomon either. With the consolidating of power, I think it's interesting how he kills Joab. I kind of wrote a note that said Joab finally kind of gets, he's not able to stay ahead of the sword. Because remember, Joab, he's kind of slimy the whole time through David's reign. Like it's he was on like when everything was switching from Saul to David, Joab was on David's side, kinda.
He wanted to be on the winning side.
Yeah, he wanted to be on the winning side. I remember we said that multiple times. Yeah, yeah. Like he just wants to be on the winning side. He's just kind of slimy there.
Yeah.
Right. And so we and that's like it helps us give us eyes to everyone around us. That's just like, yeah, well, wherever the winds are taking me, like that's and so kind of to be around there. So David basically says, be honor God, but kill all these enemies, and that's kind of what Solomon does. He like Abijah, like he wants that wife.
Adonijah.
Yeah, yeah.
That was a
Yeah, that's
politics too.
Oh yeah, like he wants.
All power.
Yeah.
If he had David's wife, that made him
Higher than David.
higher Solomon.
Yeah.
Or higher than Solomon. He would be
He's the older one.
He's the eldest anyway.
Yeah, and so he kills him, and then let's see here. Then we have Joab, which if I'm missing anything, let me know. There is one thing I wanted to say. The way Solomon treats Bathsheba around verse 19 and 20,
Right.
is I wanted to say this because it's a good opportunity to show this. So Bathsheba, went to Solomon to speak to him about Adonijah or whatever his name is, and and Adonijah, like it's weird. It's weird. No, you're close. And so she bowed down and sat down on his throne and had a throne set for the king's mother. So she sat at the right hand, and she says, "I desire a small petition made to you." The reason why this is important, this is a good way of seeing how things used to work. He knew he would never get an ear of the king. Right. He knew he would never get an ear of the king. So he went to the king's mother and to get an ear of the king. This is the our Catholic brothers and sisters. This is their view of Mary.
Mm-hmm.
That they think like that's they think Jesus is got too much on his plate. They're too small to go to the king, but they could probably get an ear of the king's mother. As Americans, where we have thrown off the shackles of tyranny for other tyrannies, we don't have kings and all that stuff. So like oftentimes that leaves us. But if you think about the Catholic Church really came up in prominence with all these lords and ladies and all that stuff, it really makes sense. I'm not saying that's the way, but that's
on the way down now when they're starting to consider LGBT.
Yeah, like that. So like noticing that Mary thing. So when you that always bothered me. It's like, why are they praying to Mary? Like all that stuff. Well, if you look at it through this lens, it's like okay, I can see it. I still don't think we have to, but I always try to bring together disparate ideas rather than driving wedges in and driving us further apart. Because putting wedges in, driving us further apart is the beginning of that great divorce. That's hell. Yeah. Like that's hell. Anytime you drive wedges in, drive farther apart, you're accomplishing hell. And so that's my opinion there. So
this is showing the human side of kings too, where God didn't want us to have a king.
Yeah.
Didn't want us to have somebody lording over us like that. So it's showing the human, he says, kill all those guys.
Yeah.
That's a human thing, right? That's more because we are the power thing. It's not
have you
ruling by God.
Have you been watching anything online? like sermons?
Not all of them. Oh, some of the sermons, but not
Sermons or
all.
the Bible studies or anything like that?
Not the Bible
Okay,
studies.
I just that's not shame. That's
No,
not
no,
shame.
I get it.
Like that's not shameful. Because she was coming for I don't know a long time.
Yeah.
Like all like well, like that's
Go ahead.
it was fascinating going through First and Second Samuel, which is right before this,
Right.
because it ends so bleakly. It ends so bleakly.
How badly?
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the point, is that the narrative of God's people are of them never really being victorious in the end. But the narrative of God's people is that he takes people that are slaves for whatever reason, slaves to whatever, and provides freedom. And so, they keep wanting, we go from the judges to the kings to, and here we are. And we see that Solomon here is really acting no different than any other king. He's not acting any more different than the kings of the Philistines or
once you get out from under that thumb, you turn into them.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what God said to Samuel when the people were crying out for a king. Like he's gonna use and abuse type of thing. Like he's gonna get what you want from it. And I think this chapter 2 really shows that. And and even with Shimei there, who had his slaves, and then he dies at the hand of Solomon. You're going to Chronicles. I think that's. Did you want to say something?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. My own business.
Yeah. My own business. So it's probably interesting. We're about to get out of this book, but I'll reiterate this. Chronicles is the same stories as first and Second Samuel and First and Second Kings. It's the same stories as there, but Chronicles is written post, or at least near the end of the Babylonian captivity, and so it's them looking back at the history, and so it draws different conclusions to the stories and kind of like that. It's why in the Hebrew Bible and in this one, Chronicles is the last book of the Old Testament, because it's meant to be read kind of last as kind of like a
summary.
Yeah, like a recap of how did we get here, type of thing. And so that's the interesting thing about Chronicles. So the David and Bathsheba story is not in Chronicles, which I think is fascinating. And so so was there anything else before we go into 3? 3 is much more theologically significant.
I thought it was interesting that David told his mother that he would grant her wish, and then he turns around and kills her.
Oh yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Solid. You're fine. I understood what you were saying. But yeah, it's. I think he's
just appeasing mom.
Yeah.
Saying no to her.
Yeah. Like he makes it. Yeah. And so that's so he basically, Solomon does his dying father's wish, and so before we read it, I just looked down at the first verse of chapter 3.
They told him not to do.
What
Egypt.
Yeah, so it's like, what? That's don't go back to Egypt. Yeah. So and think about what this chapter is, the Solomon asking for wisdom chapter. But look at how the chapter begins. The first one. Like that. So Solomon made a treaty with the Pharaoh of Egypt and married Pharaoh's daughter. And
that's her up well.
And he brought her up to the city of David until he had finished building his own house, the Lord. Like that's and so like this whole reading now is clouded because that never, like Solomon, I always growing up, I always had a super positive view of Solomon until I actually started studying him, and I was just like, ooh, like this guy. And so yeah, so we'll read chapter 3 here, and we'll talk about it because there's a bunch of interesting stuff going on here. All right, so let me share the screen. We will go forward. Let's get to chapter 3. Here we go.
Now Solomon made a treaty with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married Pharaoh's daughter. Then he brought her to the city of David, until he had finished building his own house, and the house of the Lord, and the wall all around Jerusalem. Meanwhile the people sacrificed at the high places, because there was no house built for the name of the Lord until those days. And Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father David, except that he sacrificed and burned incense at the high places. Now the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said,
"Ask, what shall I give you?"
You have shown great mercy to your servant David, my father, because he walked before you in truth, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart with you. You have continued this great kindness for him, and you have given him a son to sit on his throne, as it is this day. Now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king instead of my father David, but I am a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people, whom you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to be numbered or counted. Therefore, give to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours?"
The speech pleased the Lord, that Solomon had asked this thing.
Because you have asked this thing, and have not asked long life for yourself, nor have asked riches for yourself, nor have asked the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern justice. Behold, I have done according to your words. See, I have given you a wise and understanding heart, so that there has not been anyone like you before you, nor shall any like you arise after you. And I have also given you what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be anyone like you among the kings all your days. So if you walk in my ways, to keep my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days.
Then Solomon awoke, and indeed it had been a dream. And he came to Jerusalem, and stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, offered up burnt offerings, offered peace offerings, and made a feast for all his servants. Now 2 women who were harlots came to the king and stood before him.
"O my lord, this woman and I dwell in the same house, and I gave birth while she was in the house. That it happened, the 3rd day after I had given birth, that this woman also gave birth. And we were together. No one was with us in the house. except the two of us in the house. And this woman's son died in the night because she lay on him. So she arose in the middle of the night and took my son from my side while your maidservant slept, and laid him in her bosom, and laid her dead child in my bosom. And when I rose in the morning to nurse my son, there he was, dead. But when I had examined him in the morning, indeed, he was not my son whom I had borne.
No, but the living one is my son, and the dead one is your son.
No, but the dead one is your son, and the living one is my son.
Thus they spoke before the king. And the king said,
The one says, This is my son who lives, and your son is the dead one. And the other says, No, but your son is the dead one, and my son is the living one. Bring me a sword.
So they brought a sword before the king.
Divide the living child in two, and give half to one and half to the other.
Then the woman whose son was living spoke to the king, for she yearned with compassion for her son.
Oh, my lord, give her the living child, and by no means kill him.
Let him be neither mine nor yours, but divide him.
So the king answered,
Give the first woman the living child, and by no means kill him. She is his mother.
And all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had rendered. And they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to administer justice.
Okay. It's like the old days of radio.
It's like the old days of radio? Yeah. Yeah. Now this recording is done. It's great. I paid a pretty good amount of money for this. And it's yeah. No, don't worry, the church paid for it. Like that.
Who is the church?
Yeah. And
say the government.
Yeah. And
tax dollars paid for it.
Yeah. And so it's
who are the actors? How do we find out who the voice is?
I bet it says somewhere on it's called the Word of Promise. Word of Promise is what the product is called. And so, but it's very these Bible studies have changed when we started doing it like that.
Yeah.
But it's good because it doesn't slow. Like a lot of times we'll get frustrated by or slip up some sentences, and you end up hearing the slip up more than anything else. And okay, so Solomon's request for wisdom. I saw some interesting stuff in here I hadn't really noticed before. So we talked about Pharaoh. So he makes a treaty with Pharaoh, and what we keep queuing in on is the same thing that the mules were going on in chapter 1, is that he's going to go after some Egyptian horses later on in his life. And the big idea in Exodus, then also Deuteronomy, is like, don't go back to Egypt. And so it's interesting that it says so plainly here that he made a treaty with Solomon, and that was his way. You know, he marries the Pharaoh's daughter, which kind of talks about what's going on. But that's So did you notice anything else? I noticed interesting things, but I'm gonna wait after you guys say.
Interestingly, in his prayer, Solomon refers as follows: in the midst of your people, you have chosen a great people, too many to be numbered.
Yeah.
Thinking about his father who did a census.
The census.
The census says.
Yeah. The census at the end of Second Samuel.
Perhaps Samuel has paid attention to history.
Yeah.
He's not going to make the same stupid mistake. So I am struck by Solomon's wisdom and his ability to ask the right questions. He doesn't ask for too much, but he asks for the right things. And he winds up benefiting quite well from asking the right things.
Yeah.
Well, he gets more than he asked for.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. When he asks, because God is like, I'll give you whatever you wish.
God said, well, you didn't over ask, so here you go.
It's like the genie of the lamp, right? Like ask for the right things. I think that's what all those stories are about. Like the three wishes is about will you just serve yourself or serve others.
And for public relations purposes, Solomon did a master stroke with divide the baby.
Yeah.
That was brilliant.
His credentials as a wise man. Pretty smart. Pretty cool.
Yeah. So it's we'll get to the divide the baby here in a second. Oh no, you're fine. You're fine. Did anyone else notice anything?
Interesting footnote about that alliance. It says in 1 Kings 9:16, there's an indication that the Pharaoh gave his daughter, the Canaanite town of Gezer, as a dowry at the time of marrying Solomon. And Gezer was located near the crossing of two important trade routes. One went to the west of Gezer, went from Egypt to the north, and was very important for Egypt's commercial interests. And the other, to the north of Gezer, went from Jerusalem to the Mediterranean Sea and the port of Joppa, and was important to Solomon as a supply line for all his building projects.
Yeah. So like it's that power stuff. So like he's using like that Pharaoh, like that's you're getting all these senses of power and what it politically why it would have been so important.
What we call it today is geopolitics.
Yeah, geopolitics.
Folks had it.
Yeah. And so the thing, and Mick laughed during this phrase on verse 3. It says Solomon loved the Lord, walking in his statutes, just like his father David, except that he sacrificed burnt offerings at the high places. Like that's, and this ends up becoming a big deal later on and all these things. Yeah, Fred.
Places.
The high places are these. So there's a couple ways that you could look at this, but the kind of the biblical righteousness kind of way, which is kind of usually where I place myself on all this, is that these high places were kind of pseudo connected to God, but not really. It's kind of saying that he was sacrificing to these other gods of the lands that were around him. And so he's going up on these high places. And so that's why you see later on in Kings that there'll be a good king and he tears down all the high places. And so like that's like you'll see that later on as we get it in, that a bad king erects all the high places again. And so kind of
the altars of sacrifice that they build on
yeah, exactly.
So is that actually verse 2 then?
Verse 2?
It just says the only people sacrificed on the high places because there was no house built in the name of the Lord until those days. So
yeah,
what is that? What that?
So that's some of it, and so we also got to, like, when it talks about there was no house of the Lord was built until that day. Remember what God said when David was like, "Hey, I've got this pretty sweet palace here. I sure would like to build you one just a little bit better than mine."
Yeah.
And that's that he that God was like, "No, I've always been content to move about."
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're seeing that here is that that Solomon's going to these high places, but that it's also saying that the big temple hadn't been built yet. And it's not really. I'm not sure.
Then his wife brings their own idols and they
they run their own stuff.
Oh yeah.
Do their work.
And so you're seeing like
intermingle.
So it's just kind of funny that it says Solomon loved the Lord, except that he'd sacrifice these other idols and all that stuff.
He's right now, right there.
Yeah, like that's What?
That's the Cleveland spiritual.
Yeah, yeah.
You can't ignore the it's stronger.
Yeah.
Wind up dead.
Yeah. So like that's and I think that's interesting. And then you have him receiving his wisdom. And this has some verbiage in it that I think is interesting. First off, it's a dream. It's a it wants you to know it's a dream because it's now important stuff is happening in dreams. Jacob's ladder was a dream. You know, like all these different things were dreams. So that's I'm not diminishing it, but it says at the beginning it's a dream, and at the end it said it's a dream. Like and so that's kind of interesting. Again, I'm not detracting from it, saying I'm not that it didn't happen or anything like that. That's not what I'm doing. But it's just interesting verbiage around it. It really wants you to know that. And so and then we talked about the chosen people. Like too many to count kind of is reminiscent of the census of David. Census is kind of like the one of the last terrible things David did that really displeased God before he died. And
maybe we can ask you a question.
Yeah.
You are interested or concerned about it being a dream.
Mm-hmm.
Is that's more tightly circumscribed its validity, its potency, as opposed to the Lord speaking directly to him in his waking life?
I'm not sure, because one of Joseph's things. So Joseph is the last patriarch. You have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. They kind of and he was sold by his brothers, sold out, and he kind of lands in Egypt. And the reason why he lands in Egypt and becomes prominent in Egypt is because when he's in a dungeon, he's able to interpret dreams multiple times. And he interprets Pharaoh's dream, which was basically you're going to have 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine or something like.
Yeah,
I can't remember the numbers right now, but
yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it's 7 and 7. Okay, so like that's yeah. And so,
well, we always had a conversation.
Yeah. It's so easy to remember. So you have, go ahead, Lee.
The Jewish Study Bible says, the dream at the large open shrine at Gideon, northwest of Jerusalem, and 4 divine grants. The story may be describing a ritual of incubation attested elsewhere in ancient literature. A person seeking guidance would sleep in a sanctuary or home spot in the hope of a divine visitation in a dream.
Okay. Well, that would make sense. So there's like what they're saying is that there's some historical precedent for the story being written like this.
Yes. Yeah. And but he was looking for something. He was looking for wisdom. He may not have said it outright, but that was his intent in going.
Yeah. And so because he doesn't ask for anything much or anything like that. And he doesn't ask for riches or honor. Let's see, what was it? I'm trying to think the other thing, but he's just looking for wisdom. And
I'm a little child and I know not how to go in and out. It's kind of for guidance. Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so there's a couple things at the end of the dream that I thought were interesting. So verse 13 and kind of to the end of this little section. And I have also given you what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be anyone like you among the kings of your days, so that if you walk in my ways to keep my statutes and my commandments as your father David walked, that I will lengthen your days.
It caught my eye. It seems to overstate David's behavior.
Yeah.
Actual behavior.
Yeah. And so that stood out to me. And so then he awoke and went to the ark of the covenant of the Lord and offered a burnt offering. So he goes to the ark then, not one of the high places. And then we have his first judgment. Now, reading through this, did it strike anyone as different than what they've heard before, or it hit anyone differently, or what did you notice anything about?
On the third day.
Do what?
On the third day after I was delivered.
Okay, let's see where.
On the other woman's child.
The other one, living inside.
Okay, that's interesting. So the 3 day. Well, we always pay attention to those numbers, especially when they come in the good or bad ones. 3 days. That's an interesting number there. So 3 days after he's delivered.
And
yeah.
she was willing to sacrifice herself, the things she wanted for the life of her child. I think that's very important in connection with the 3 day.
Yeah, yeah. So when I was reading this, it really, because this is, he's showing his wisdom here, and you can tell the story is important, like the way it's written and all that stuff. You can tell the story is important, but it's interesting how it functions here. Is this talking just about a baby? Like that's, because I think it's talking about the baby, showing his wisdom, but is this talking about other things that might be split up? And people taking, like the true wise path is to set, like as Lee put it, like sacrifice yourself, like in order to keep things whole, rather than killing and splitting. Like that's, and so that you can get what you want or something like that. Like is it showing that there is a path of holiness and godliness here, that life comes when you're not, when you may not be winning, right? And that's,
this is communion. This is communion.
Yeah.
Come together.
Yeah, come together.
Look at the baby in half.
Yeah.
So this does extrapolate the bigger stuff.
Yeah. Like that's
a good way.
I've never looked at this story into the extrapolation of bigger stuff. This is like you said before. And I was like, oh, and it made me like think about, because the one cycle that I've been noticing at the end of 2 Samuel is that all of a sudden they start talking about Israel and Judah separately. Yeah, they're still together, but in this book, in this scroll of the Kings, they split. And I don't know.
They go back together in the end.
Yeah.
If you keep reading on and on. So I wonder why they had the split in the first place.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to put your hand in fire to remember it's hot.
Yeah.
Maybe that's it.
And like it just reminds me of like even church stuff. Like I'll pick on Mark for a second. So my buddy, he was in Seattle, and he had done a good job of getting all the alligators at bay in the church. And it's like all this, he had done a good job, and the church was doing okay. But then he had the call to Tampa, and he took that, and the alligators swooped in, looking for power, and that church died a year and a half after he left. And it's because like that's all these people that were kind of upset at the things that he was doing, like that's, and he went back for a wedding, and they had put a sign up that said no children allowed up in the balcony or something like that. But as you walked in the front door of the church, that was the first thing you saw. Was a sign that said like no children allowed. like all children allowed. Yeah. And all these people, and that guy was always super upset about like kids running up into that balcony and all of that stuff. So, but any example, I'm just using church stuff because that's kind of what I know. But like I think we've all have stories where people have tried to maintain power for themselves, that they'd rather be king over ashes than than see stuff.
Better to reign in hell.
Yeah, better to reign in yeah, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven.
That's even there's a family that has brother and sister, and a big family, and the brother has one idea and the sister has another, and they do not like each other, and they're destroying the whole family. It's the same aspect as what you're saying. They're destroying the whole family because of their power struggle.
Yeah.
You know, it's even in a small nucleus as a family, it can have that effect.
Yeah.
You know, doesn't even have to be. And then you go to a church, a bigger room. But
bigger
I've
church,
seen what you're talking about.
governments, communities,
So
like that's like that. That's what I'm worried about.
The prostitute says.
Right. Mother and father can do the same thing. The same idea. Right?
This is right.
Nick's reading The Great Divorce right now. So that's all. It's a moment.
First time again, this scenario where this mother's grief for her son has destroyed her family.
Yeah. Doesn't get it.
Forgetting the larger family.
The whole thing, you're killing it.
Became the center of the world as it were. You really sent me down the rabbit hole.
It isn't that.
I feel like everyone's laughing because what was that about 2 years ago? No, on why you not like we were here. You went to that. And like, good sign. Yeah. So it's.
I have a question on verse 12.
Okay.
God is speaking to Solomon in the dream, and he says, nor will anyone like you arise again.
Yeah.
What about Jesus?
Oh, well, it's I don't how do we
like you?
Okay.
Jesus isn't like him.
Well, they're supposed to be wise and have that,
Yeah. So I think there's some.
It's a boasting thing, though, don't you think? He's saying there, it's like you're going to be the big boy on the block. You're going to be the.
And I don't think
Jesus never looks for that.
I don't think Solomon gives up the baby at the end. Like that's like I don't think he keeps trying to amass more and more and more pattern, basically splitting up the baby over and over again with every wife that he kills. Like that's and that's his downfall.
That's the
like
I'll do this.
Becomes the other person.
Yeah. And it's interesting that it's harlots that are having this issue. And so and also to Lee's point that she said earlier with the 3 days, that there were 3 days. The last 3 days that we saw was at the end of 2 Samuel, and David was given 3 options. Like he was given 3 options that they could face famine for 7 years, that they could face be pursued 3 months of being pursued, or 3 days of plagues. And plague. And 3 days of plague would affect David personally the least. It would affect everyone else the most. Yeah. It would affect everyone else the most. And he chooses 3 days. And that's the last 3 verses in 2 Samuel. And like and so all of a sudden you have here another 3 shows up and talking about splitting these babies and death. And it seems to be another story about this righteous mother who says, don't kill it, just give it away. And I'm wondering, like, if that's just a good, like, that's the true nugget of wisdom there, that we all can take that sometimes we have to sacrifice our for them. Yeah. Like that's, I'll take the fall for them. I'll take all that. So it's just not rising up. And I'm amazed at that because I've never seen that before in this story. And someday that'll make a good sermon. And so that's just me splitting the baby, for my own power and righteousness. But that's pretty good. Any last things to end today on? Okay. All right. Well, all the people you are watching on YouTube, thanks for joining us today.